So what's going to happen to this dude? So he's going to go face first into the water, and then what's going to happen to him?
So probably what you're going to see happen, because it's amazing. You see something of this size, it doesn't feel like it's happening that quick. But this wave is going to go from that to throwing itself entirely over, detonating, and becoming a wall of just tumbling white water within probably the next half second.
Mm-hmm.
And all the while, this guy is, I'm pretty sure that's Grant Twiggy Baker, but I'm not sure. I think by the board. But this guy's going to basically, as this wave is pulling him up, he's going to skip and cartwheel probably down this face as it's pulling that entire ocean in front of that wave. And then he's just going to become a part of that water and just get sent to the depths.
So
probably.
here it pulls him up to that height, presumably, right?
Yeah.
And then just slams him down.
So at this point, when like we were talking earlier in this session about wave dynamics, fluid dynamics, this wave is coming at 40 miles per hour, whatever. And then it hits this segment of reef and it slows down immensely. And that causes it to stand up and throw. And so now it's sucking water and it's going to pull the water up and dump it back down. And so he's going to be getting sucked up and drop back down.
And slam back down.
Welcome to the Better Brain Podcast, where we talk about everything brain health for anyone who has a brain or knows somebody who does and wants to make it better.
Today's guest is Jibreel Cader, and he's a medical student here at UCLA. He's also in this big wave surfing community. He's going to talk all about big wave surfing, the potential ramifications of big wave surfing. We're going to analyze some surfing videos. It's going to be great.
Yep, everything from the anatomy of a big wave to the anatomy of a surfer, trying to understand the connection between nature, sense of meaning, sense of purpose, and longevity, health, things like that, as well as the risk of this extreme sport and raising awareness about head injury and head impacts, which is a passion of his.
Yeah, it's great. I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's get into it. All right, I'm really excited for our guest today, Kevin. His name is Jibreel. He's a UCLA medical student. He's also a surfer, and he's in this big wave surfing community, and he's doing some really cool research looking at brain injury in surfers. That again is a topic that I don't think has got enough awareness and needs some more awareness and some more research behind it. So I'm super excited to have him on to talk about the anatomy of a surfer. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm pumped. Thanks for coming. Jibreel approached me several months ago to talk about this very topic, brain injury in big wave surfers, an undercovered topic. And so I asked him, well, what is a big wave? What are we talking about here? Is this subjectively big from the shore? It looks humongous? Or are we talking about 30, 50, 60, 70 foot waves, going 50 miles an hour? Is that what we're talking about? So maybe let's start there. Big picture, 30,000 foot view. What is big wave surfing?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, though, I just have to recognize I can't have any stolen valor here. I can't call myself a big wave surfer. There's a lot of subjectivity to this sport and what is big, what's not big, what's regular surfing. But some of the guys that I hope to talk about and kind of shed some light on their stories, these guys are the pioneers and the giants of the sport who are doing things that make what I have wandered into a fraction of what they do. But yeah, just to begin the conversation talking about what is big wave surfing, what is surfing from the aerial view. Big wave surfing, I mean, as a sport, it's developed all over the planet. You see it in South Africa. You saw it in Hawaii. We see it here on our West Coast, Portugal, all over the world. But when we really saw it, it was early pioneers in the waterman community. So people who were our beach lifeguards, guys that were out there doing these long paddles, who started surfing, and they slowly started pushing into more and more dangerous waves that no one else would venture into. This is back in a time when the surfboard leash didn't even exist, and guys would go paddle out of Waimea Bay on the North Shore of Hawaii when it was 25-foot faces. They'd lose their board and have to swim all the way in. Times have changed clearly. We have jet skis, we have inflatable devices, we have neon colors that are used to help identify people that are floating in the water, radio comms, everything. And so where I come into this whole story is, I grew up on the Central Coast surfing. I was a beach lifeguard, worked with the Morro Bay Harbor Department. And from a young age, I looked up to the guys that set the culture for the entire surf world. And that was those that pushed the limits. That was the big wave surfers.
What were some of the guys in your area?
Yeah, so coming out of San Luis Obispo, there's not too many people that are coming out there that have big names, but the guys I looked up to were my senior lifeguards, who would be the ones who'd go venture out into these super remote reefs where you'd have to drive like 45 minutes out of town, hike another half hour down some crazy bluff, paddle out by yourself. There's no one to help you. There's no cell service. And they would go charge 35-foot waves. Guys like Mac Reinhardt, these are names that probably most people who are listening to this podcast will never have heard of unless you're from the Central Coast. Guys that, are super humble and aren't going to lay claim that they do any of this stuff. But I think the surf community is founded upon people like that,
So where did big wave surfing actually start? Is there, a exact location or an exact break where big wave surfing started, or was this kind of something that happens organically as everyone all over the world that's surfing is just kind of pushing the limits?
Sure. To my knowledge, the culture of surfing, you can't separate it from Hawaii, from the Hawaiian Islands and the Hawaiian people. The North Shore of Hawaii, it was kind of that mecca of surf culture. You saw development, progression, and cultural intermingling. People from all over the planet would go to Hawaii to show what they got, see what there was to see, and surf some of the best waves in the world. And so Waimea Bay was kind of instrumental in that. It's this massive bay on the North Shore where in the summer it's entirely flat and people go and swim, jump around. But then in the winter, you'll see waves pushing anywhere from 20 up to 50-foot faces. And every year there's, or not every year, it's based on a certain swell period and size criteria. There's a competition called the Eddie Aikau Invitational event for anyone who, are you guys familiar with Eddie Aikau and the story?
Tell us about it.
Yeah.
So Eddie Aikau is one of the local Hawaiian lifeguards who his family has been there for generations. And he was known as one of the most brave, resilient models for the entire community, specifically the waterman community. He was avid, I can't even say avid, extremely, extremely impressive surfer and waterman. And he died a tragic death at sea and made efforts in the final moments of his life that echo through history. And so in his honor, that was one of the earliest, to my knowledge, organized pursuits of big wave surfing, was actually in remembrance of this man who pioneered surfing to levels that we'd never seen before, hence the birth of big wave surfing, things like that. But there's always been people all around the planet who've been pushing these limits, who do so quietly, like in the Central Coast.
So what you mentioned the size, the threshold for it to be at like a big wave surf. You mentioned it's subjective, but what kind of size are we looking at, if you could maybe provide a range?
Yeah, so it depends, again, exactly as you correctly said, it depends who you go and talk to. For example, I know Surfline, which is I believe it's a corporation. They help with forecasting. They do a lot of media coverage stuff. Yeah. They do a film series, I think it's called like 25-foot plus or something. And I guess the whole criteria is like, when it's 25-foot plus, then that's how you know it's a really big wave. That's how you know it's the craziest stuff that's going on. But the fact of the matter is, you talk to anyone, they'll give you a different number. And I think the metric that people will go to is not objective at all, and it's very subjective. They'll go in terms of fear. How scary is it? Like, what effect is it having on your psyche to go and brave the conditions and go out there? Because you could talk to someone who's never surfed a day in their life, or maybe they went to Hawaii once and did a surf lesson, surfed a 1-foot wave, and they'll say, hey, yeah, a 7-foot wave, that's taller than me, that's scary, that's a big wave, right? But I mean, to different guys like Alice Labeer, to guys like Kai Lenny, they're out there pushing 60, 70-foot faces, and to them 20-foot might not be considered a big wave. But for the frame of a reference of conversation, let's talk like, let's follow the 25-foot. Let's say 25-foot and above. We're talking like 2.5-story building right there. Yeah,
I think it's important also to talk about your experience in the big wave surfing community, because you talked about early. You're like, I'm not going to say I'm a big wave surfer, but certainly in some form or fashion, you're involved in the community, whether that's going out on the boats that with these guys that are surfing these big waves, and then kind of seeing them go in and get like a close-up view of that. Sure, yeah. Can you detail that a little bit? Yeah.
So like I said, growing up, some of the waterman mentors that I have, like, I think you'll hear in the community, a lot of people will say watermen as opposed to just surfer, because they're not just surfers. They're the guys who are your beach lifeguards. So they're with the Coast Guard. and they have their free divers, spear fishermen, out rigging canoes, whatever, and their home is the water, and surfing is one of those facets. But growing up, I looked up to a lot of these guys, and then I would see some of my friends actually that I grew up around, slowly pushing their limits, dabbling, going from what we would surf, you know, like 6 to 8 foot. Now they're, once they kind of started college age, they've pushed their limits, and their endurance is up. They're starting to go surf 18, 20-foot waves. When I got to college, I was accepted into the UC Santa Barbara surf team. So we were a group of collegiate surfers going and competing through the NSSA umbrella to different parts around the state. And some of the guys on our team, whenever, like, for example, Mavs was going off, or Puerto Escondido down in mainland Mexico, they would be out there. And so I would see their trajectory, see how things change. I would learn from them. They would give me training tips. They would take me out on days that was bigger than I'd be comfortable in to help push my own limits. And then now when I got into medical school, I had this opportunity of increased knowledge in the medical sphere. I was an EMT for like 4 years now, did some academic training in that sphere as well. And so in that community, I would venture out to try and make sure everyone was as up to date as they could be on basic life-saving procedures and techniques. Awareness, you know, talking about head injury came into the conversation early on, because just like the cultures of skating, snowboarding, football, soccer, whatever, you'd see young guys who would get a concussion and they'd be a little bit out of it, and they wouldn't quite make the connection to where it was coming from, what was causing it. But specifically, the conversation points started to develop more and more. And then now in medical school, I realized this was much more prevalent of an issue than I'd ever known before. We started to see some of the heroes in the community, like Kirby Brown out of Australia, Sean Dollar up in NorCal, more recently Kai Lenny as well, talking about their experiences with head injury. And so just like the sport itself was, its direction is pulled and pushed by those that push the limits. When they say, hey, this is an issue because it affected me, people start to listen. And so in that frame, I started to explore down and see, how could we improve outcomes for people? How can we reach out to this community that quite literally raised me? Like, I grew up looking up to these people. The person I am is influenced by the tones and the cultures set by these communities. And these, now it's, you know, it's 2 generations of surfers that has affected me and a lot of people like me.
Before we get deeper there, I'm looking for even more about the wave, the surf, what it takes and what it looks like to actually ride one of these big waves. So you said 25 plus, maybe up to 60, 70 feet. You know, I know there's been quoted 100-foot waves, right? And tons of documentaries and other stories about that. But how fast can you get up to on the board on one of these, let's say, 60-foot waves?
Like from starting to surf?
Yeah.
Or, okay, so for the average person who like wants to pick up surfing, who's maybe never done
on a big wave.
Right, but just from square one, or just from like you've been surfing?
How fast is
like
one of these
Oh,
professional?
yeah, miles per hour.
Miles per hour. How fast are you going down the face of
Absolutely.
a big
So,
wave?
I mean, open water swells travel anywhere from the range of like 20 miles per hour up to like 60 miles per hour. But then the physics of it is, and the hydrodynamics of it is, that when that swell hits a fixed structure underwater, you know, we're talking about a reef, we're talking about a jetty, we're talking about sand, it aggressively slows down almost to a dead halt, and before unleashing every bit of energy that it has. And that's why when you see a wave, you know, it's going to hit and then it crests and throws, usually, as you'll see that transference of energy. And so it's in that pocket of moment that you see people going from getting up to the speed of the wave, getting up to sometimes like 25, 30 miles per hour, just enough to get into the momentum of that face to actually be able to pop up and be incorporated now into that wave's energy.
Wow.
I think what we should do is just play the video of one of these guys surfing one of these big waves, and then you can like just break it down for us and maybe take us through as best you can, like mindset and hydrodynamics and what the body and the board are going through, maybe even the mind at each stage during someone surfing one of these waves. So this is the Guinness Book of World Records. 8 years ago, the tallest wave ever surfed. This was 8 years ago, though.
Yeah. So first, just to point out, this guy's getting towed in by a jet ski, right?
So pause it.
And so one of the things that's worth noting is, like we talked about, the waves the free energy of the wave itself coming in the ocean before it unleashes itself on that fixed structure of the ocean floor. The bigger the wave, the faster it's going to be traveling. And so as you get to a certain size threshold, it's almost impossible by your own body's strength and capacity to paddle up to speed. Things that help is the size of the board. You know, having a longer, more voluminous board will float more, almost like you're paddling a canoe.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's like Sean Dollar holds the world record for a paddle-in wave out of Cortez Bank, which is an underwater seamount about 100 miles off the coast of San Diego. And he paddled into this 61-foot wave. And so that means he had to physically, with his own ability and power, get himself up to that speed of a 61-foot wave traveling in the middle of the ocean. Now, as it gets to a certain size threshold, that our body just can't keep up. Because otherwise, if you tried to paddle into something of that size, you would get held up in the lip. Basically, this part that's throwing over, you would become incorporated into that and get drilled into the bottom of the ocean. So an innovation in the last couple decades has been bringing jet skis out and using it to actually tow people into these waves, get them up to speed so that they can be riding it rather than depending upon paddling up to something that's traveling 60 plus miles per hour.
So that's an interesting point. So meaning that before jet skis, could you have ever been able to surf this big of a wave?
So to my knowledge, people weren't doing it. And the confidence that I have in saying that is because people don't still do it. There's a culture and a pride around paddle surfing as opposed to towing. Like, they're different things. But there's definitely a culture of you have to paddle yourself through the breaking waves, you know, end up expending about 3 miles worth of paddling energy, get yourself out there, paddle yourself into one of these, as opposed to with a jet ski, which is able to whip you into something. Obviously, that doesn't change the heroism that goes into putting yourself in the position to take one of these on the head.
Right. All right. So do you want to back it up a little bit, or is that? All right. So we stopped at here. So what's happening here, do you think?
Yeah. So basically what you guys are seeing right now, and it's something that kind of cues you off to it, whether it's a smaller wave or a larger wave, is that transition period from the deep water into the underwater structure that's going to cause it to break. And so what you'll see is this feathering right at the tops of the waves like this, which means that now that energy transition has gone from being forward and backwards in a horizontal plane to now a vertical plane. The wave's coming up and it's getting ready. It's catching the wind that's behind it as it's about to start throwing over. And so this surfer's basically gets whipped in by the jet ski, and now he's riding down the face. And
what is the physics of that happening there to the board and to the guy?
Yeah, so guys who do tow and surfing, their boards are made of a heavier material, so they're usually like 3 times the weight, yet a third the length. Much denser material. There's actually, I'm pretty sure, like a metal filament that lines it usually, that gives it the weight to actually get down the face of the wave and see it as something that's a weight pulling down rather than a weight on top. That allows someone to actually maintain in the wave, set a line, and move quicker through it. Yeah.
Super cool.
I've heard Kai Laney talk about, I think, this moment, you know, in the wave where he's painting the face of the wave like his surfboard's a paintbrush. And at that moment, as compared to, you know, a 15-foot wave where there's seconds, maybe a second, and the autopilot kicks in and lots of, you know, automated decisions are made by the body in order to navigate that wave. When you've got a 60-foot wave, you might have 5 seconds to make it down the face. And so you can actually think about in rapid succession what you're going to do and plan that series of moves and maneuvers.
Yeah, something people will draw parallels to when they start to surf waves that are a little bit bigger, especially when they're at least bigger than they are, the surfer is tall, is that you start to feel almost the expression that is you see in snowboarding or skiing, where it's like, this is no longer a face of a wave, and now we're dealing with the slope of a mountain, you know? anecdotally, like for me, like being out in Indonesia, the first time I started to push waves that were bigger than I was comfortable in, something I would say like double overhead, which is like another subjective measurement, but just waves that bigger than I'd ever surfed in before. And I remember the first time just even paddling out and up and over these things, it's like, wow, there's seconds going by that I'm crawling up a wall of water, right? And so now in change, when you have someone riding down it, you'll see the styles actually of how like some of the toe-in surfers surf is they're doing these little chop hops, airs, 180s, 360s that is directly inherited from snowboarding, where you have your feet locked into something. And so your approach is very different. Whereas if you watch someone who paddles into a wave, their whole thing, they're usually not trying to do as many things because they're not locked in. And the lines they set based on the equipment they're using will be very different.
Right.
Yeah.
What is that view like? You know, I do a little bit of surfing, and when, like you mentioned, when something is a little bit bigger than you're comfortable, and then you kind of just your perspective and your view, maybe you're a little bit more used to something that's a little more horizontal instead of so vertical. I can only imagine what that perspective is like for someone in this situation.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it would only be speculation, but I would imagine, you know, just framing it up from anything I've seen, is that there's just pure fear and awe as you're trying to make it down the face. You'll hear a lot of these guys talk about, like, I just wanted to make it down the face. Like, so that they weren't incorporated into that top part of the wave, and then literally just carried 40 feet in the air and dropped straight to the flats of the trough of the wave, basically going over the falls.
The conflict I find between confidence, guts, bravery, courage, whatever it takes to get out there, and the vulnerability to nature is surprising, and is what makes it so compelling to watch these events and to listen to surfers like yourself and others speak about it, because there is a matter of facing fear, of facing that kind of body response that is automatic and will never go away, and then funneling that into some set of actions that actually could potentially improve performance. To see all of that come together in seconds, and then to see someone go after it again and again despite falls and injuries and things like that is, I think, remarkable.
You mentioned what the thought process was as you're kind of coming up, and you mentioned Kai Lenny. I wonder if there's any thought process going on at
He talks about it in an awesome episode, Rich Roll, that he recently filmed, as that he has a series of thoughts that are in rapid succession that he's able to, in some ways, track. There's logic and there's emotion, and he's able to integrate those two to, you know, vie for performance. And I think Rich Roll brought up a really good point, which was that how do you know the difference between a gut feeling of this is a wave I shouldn't take, and a gut feeling of this is the amount of fear I need to perform at my best?
What do you think?
As opposed to like the emotion tied in with
what do you think there's a lot of thought process going on in that situation that this guy's in, or the situation that Kai Lenny's talking about? Is it universal the way that Kai thinks, or do you Kai is probably a 1% of the big wave guys? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Is this just, you know, the Mamba mentality of surfing, you know, or is this ubiquitous to most big wave surfers?
I think it's definitely towards the Mamba mentality, but I will say is that the more comfortable someone becomes in their own skill and capacity in that environment, and their familiarity with a specific break, no two waves are the same. And I'm not just talking about breaks, you know, like Pipeline is obviously different than like Malibu Second Point. No two waves at any break are the same. No two waves at Malibu are going to be the same. No two waves at Pipe are going to be the same. And because of that, once someone has really understood what's going on under the water, understands how different swells interact with it, and they've really mastered a spot, like Pete Mel up in NorCal, one of the famous Mavericks guys, you watch him surf as opposed to a 19-year-old who's coming up from SoCal to go try Mavs for his first time. He looks so comfortable. He kicks out and he's able to just big smile on his face, talk to people. Whereas you see someone getting one of these waves for the first time in their life, and they look like they almost got hit by a bus but didn't, and then they're just still processing for like 15 minutes what the hell just happened, you know? And so the emotion factor, I think some people sometimes are able to factor more, but when you're put in a very, very critical situation where you just barely make it out, it evokes emotion. There's raw, pure, present emotion. You know, people talk about getting barreled as like all of time stops and you're put in a portal in space, basically, where you're surrounded by water and everything is timeless.
Yeah. We've talked about this before. I invoked, and I often do on this podcast, flow, the state of flow, which I think any of us would agree based on Csikszentmihalyi's work that first described it. It's this state where the challenge meets the skill level, but when both are really high, that state that's achieved can be one of peak performance, peak enjoyment. That's the way it's described. And in that state of peak performance, peak enjoyment, when challenge is really high, skill is really high, time stands still. You know, it's as if time doesn't even exist. I shouldn't say time stands still. Time passes without somebody even knowing it. It's not not part of the equation.
Because some people endorse that feels like forever.
Right.
So I don't know if time necessarily passes quicker than usual, but rather time just doesn't exist.
Or
is
the individual is more focused on the moment than anything else.
Right.
And I've, you know, in every sport there is this, and perhaps more in extreme sports. I also brought up the Rise of Superman, the book, where it talks all about flow state in extreme sports and how the author thinks that is what created this culture of breaking records by feet and miles, seconds and minutes and hours, not milliseconds like it would be in ice skating or you know, some foot race or you know, a car race. But these sports that invoke this humongous risk and a humongous amount of skill to meet that create this new state that grows by leaps and bounds from one athlete to the next.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it's like you almost got hit by a bus, right? But usually if I almost got hit by a bus, I would try to avoid that intersection or that area. You know what I mean? But like, seems like this is something different in terms of how you relate to that moment, to that location, because people keep going back for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's some kind of circuitry that doesn't quite make sense, but anyone who's been in it will just undeniably go back again and again. I'm sure we'll go through some clips of like pretty bad wipeouts at some point too. And the fact of the matter is that like metaphorical bus does hit you sometimes. In fact, it's actually sometimes feels more often that you get hit by the bus than you don't.
Yeah.
But there's something in that moment that you create. And like you said, it's all this experience, this time, this effort paired with the perfect conditions to make something harmonious. But on top of it, it's like most people are putting so much resource effort into something like specifically big wave surfing. You know, going to your local beach break, driving down after work, not as much investment. But if you've been training for like the last 5 years intensely with this concept that you are going to go put yourself in the most uninhabitable part of the planet to go do something crazy, and you have to get a crew, you have to get water safety, you have to have equipment, you have to make sure you have enough boards, that your gear all works, inflation vest, food, stay, and then you have to go. And then on top of all that, you have something as changing as the weather, aka the waves. Right. You know, the tide might be off, the wind might be off. Like so many things have to go right for that one moment of standstill to really come together, which I mean, we as viewers get to just like watch a wave, be like, oh, wow, look at that. Cool.
But so much has come together for that one moment between nature and man and everything else.
Yeah.
I was listening to an episode of The Risk with Nick Lamb, where he was discussing that in some of the biggest competitions that he's been in, he has to boat out to actually catch the wave, and he gets nauseous from and kind of maybe seasick from the boat and the fumes, and so he's about to get in the water, and he has no other choice. That's just how you do it, and so he's paddling out, feeling terrible, but yet obviously we've seen him excel in those situations.
those channel boats are notorious. It's usually like a little like Tonga boat or some like jet ski or something, and you're just inhaling exhaust. The choppiest turns, water, low visibility.
Why don't we keep playing this?
So what speed is he reaching right here?
Yeah, I mean, so there's different devices that people are wearing now that show speed. For example, I know Nathan Florence, who's a huge name in the surfing community, him and his brothers. He had a device, remember, he put on his board once surfing Jaws, and it was like, you know, he was getting up to like 40 miles per hour.
Wow.
And it's one of those things people are like, oh, 40 miles per hour, it's not that big of a deal. But the fact of the matter is when you're going 40 miles per hour on water, it turns into concrete exponentially, you know.
Yeah, so let's talk through that. So, you know, when I've heard about the physics of the board, the fins, the speed, when you put all that together and the hydrodynamics, I guess, you're talking about forces at 40 miles an hour that are ridiculous, potentially death-defying, right? Deadly. And so what happens every time the board hits one of these, you know, I guess ripples in the water or some of the whitewash, or if the jet ski, you know, has created a path?
No, absolutely. That's a very valuable question. So that's part of another aspect of which equipment you use, because something like one of these tow boards, because of the weight of it and the dimensions, it'll quite literally just cut through it. Whereas if you have a really big, buoyant, light board, that thing can hit one ripple that's literally like this big, just a little speed bump, and send someone falling down a 35-foot face. Wow. You know, which is actually happens very, very frequently. You'll see someone paddling and everything looks perfect. They're dropping down a face of the wave, and then you see their board just come up a little bit on the side, and that's enough at those speeds to throw you off and have everything go to hell.
So every little bump in that case is actually not only throwing people off balance, but reverberating through their body. I mean, have you experienced yourself bumps like that actually jolt you?
Yeah, so I mean, these chops, as you might call them, the faster and faster you're going, so like stuff I've experienced on like an 8-foot wave, you know, I feel like whether it's skating or mountain biking, you're getting a jostle and you feel your entire head pop and shake as you're navigating these little speed bumps, basically. Now, it's something like this, it's enough to quite literally throw this person a few feet in the air. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a substantial source of trauma per se, or repetitive like subclinical injury. I know, for example, in mountain biking, we do see that pattern though, and that there's studies going on right now in Europe where they're looking at like repeated low impact stressors. But I don't know.
What about, and I think we're going to see an interview from 4 months ago, someone that was up at Mavs that might have, you know, surfed, quote unquote, you know, the largest wave. And he's talking about feeling like he's getting pulled back, like the wave is just pulling him back and like trying to get him up into the wave, into the face to then, you know, throw him over. Is that something, A, that you experience with like an 8-foot wave, and then B, something that is probably a lot more significant and dramatic when you're looking at something like 100 feet?
So especially at reef breaks, something that occurs is that, and it's, you know, you're not, no one who's just watching this on media is going to really be able to appreciate, is that these waves aren't just two-dimensional objects, right? It's not just the vertical, it's the lateral as well. These waves, their energy is going probably like 3-4 times the distance forward as it is in the back as well. And so when these things, these bundles of energy come and hit a coastline, sometimes as it gets big, like at Mavs, for example, it's not that, oh, the bundle of energy hits the reef and throws itself. It's the bundle of energy is coming, and it quite literally, instead of throwing itself, draws the entire ocean in front of it, between the wave itself and the sand, pulls it out. Like you see with tsunamis. Like we're talking about that scale where the entire coastline will drop a couple feet right before a set comes and hits. And then it will surge all the way forward. So it's a massive amount of energy. We're talking about like a football field's worth of water volume being maneuvered and thrown over itself in a matter of seconds. It's pretty incredible.
And when you're, say, Nazare, for example, You've got these 60-foot waves pushing people down the face 50 miles an hour or 40, and they're coming every 20 seconds or something like that. Right? I mean, how do you deal with the aftermath of when you're done with the wave?
Yeah, so that's a whole nother aspect, right? And that's, we were talking earlier about the joy in just making the drop on a wave that is challenging you. You've challenged your capacity just to make the drop down the face. A lot of the times with big wave surfing, you'll see guys just go down the face, and then you'll see just the biggest look of joy and accomplishment and fulfillment, only to get steamrolled by the rest of the wave, right? And then they'll paddle back out and do the exact same thing again.
Yeah.
And so there's something in the drop. There's something in that weightless, whether it's painting of the wave, critical harmony of all of your skill and effort, that is where the joy really comes together, and the challenge really speaks to itself. Because I think, in my experience with surfing, the drop is the most critical, difficult part. And then everything else is just sheer enjoyment, play, fun.
So what an interesting concept here is, what is he hearing? Like, you know, you're talking about all this volume coming over and then crashing down behind him. It's almost like he's probably hearing a lot, right? Like, in addition to trying to navigate everything, it just seems like from my perspective, a terrifying experience.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, with waves of this caliber and size, you're quite literally talking about something that sounds like an explosion going off. You're talking about like a missile going off near you. You know, when you're a mile away from the break, sometimes driving to some of these waves, you'll literally hear it like detonations going off, as if you live near a military base. But it's incredible, because when you're that close to something, once you've engaged in it and you're actually putting your body and life on the line, the anecdotes I've heard is that you just don't hear anything. You are just, you're hearing maybe explosion, but really you're just so zoned in that all of that sensorineural stuff that's not staying on your board and getting out of this just gets silenced.
You
know?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Should we take a look at a couple more?
Yeah, let's do it.
So
that one. So this one is a classic, right? Yeah. This is a Nazare one. I mean, go ahead, intro this, or tell us about this one.
This is a Nazare also. Especially the angle of the wave and the shot, you just really feel like the entire ocean is being sucked out and put over this person. Like, it's really incredible to watch, and the spectating up on the bluffs there is crazy. I got to go to Nazare like maybe 3 years ago, and it wasn't breaking like that, but it's just such an incredible setup.
That's
incredible, right?
That's unbelievable.
That's a long ride.
He's covering a football field in a matter of seconds, right? Honestly, at this point now, like 2 football fields.
Wow. It's nuts.
That's just terrifying. All right. Well, and then this middle one is?
Yeah, this is Chopu. I believe this is Koa Rothman, which is down in Tahiti.
And this is from one of those boats we were talking about.
Yeah, so usually it's somewhere like this where it's a reef pass. There'll be a shallow shelf of reef like this, and then a deep water channel right alongside it. So people will park boats, jet skis, rescue skis will be there.
So this one, from an uneducated perspective, but I do know something about this wave. It doesn't seem that big. It doesn't seem like, you know, like you looked at Nazare, you look at this, you're like, if I had to pick, you know, I'd probably rather surf this one than Nazare. But there's a lot about this wave that we probably don't see just from this video, or can appreciate from the video.
Actually, and right now, if you were to pause it right there. So one difference too is the type of wave that you're dealing with. You know, whether it's sand covering like these deep like V canyons, which is what causes Nazare to do its peaking the way it does, is the underwater canyon literally channels swell energy to focalize it on one spot. This is a reef pass. Like I was saying, you have a very shallow shelf of reef and then deep water beside it. So those deep swells hit it and just unload. Difference here is there's probably only 3 feet of water under this guy right now.
Wow.
And it's razor sharp coral. And like we were talking about earlier, this is the type of wave that instead of introducing itself to the reef, it calls upon all the water of the coastline to express itself. So when waves like this come, you'll literally see, if you're watching the reef, all this water surging off of it as if a tsunami was approaching. It's really incredible and horrifying at the same time. Yeah. And then, you know, you're saying like, oh, I'd probably rather do that. I would also, if someone put a gun to my head, I'd probably do that one because that's just, I can't fathom.
What are we talking, 20 feet there?
Yeah. You could see, that's the thing about wave size too. You know, we're talking about face of the wave as opposed to what's the wave height. Because once the wave pitches, it's only about this tall. Whereas if we're talking about wave face height, we're talking from the trough all the way to the crest of the wave, you know, which is including the lip on this thing. It's like the lip alone is like 6 feet thick.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're talking about fear and would I be put in that situation? You could literally drive a semi truck through that, like a FedEx shipping truck through the barrel there, 2 of them side by side and fit in that. And so now imagine us in this room and quite literally the entire width and size of this room being open air and a huge sledge of water is getting thrown over you.
And then I think something that you mentioned before that's important to note is that's in, you said 3 feet of water, pretty much, right?
So these things will, like I said, suck all the water off the reef, so you can see the reef below you. You're looking at what you. But
that implies that if you get sucked up into this thing and wipe out, you're getting smashed straight into 3 feet of water with reef on it.
Yeah. And these guys, and you'll see the I guess the punishment, the consequences, the punishment,
This is Jaws.
Yeah, Jaws is up on Maui in the Hawaiian Islands.
Another long ride.
Yeah, this one's incredible. And so you can see this is a tow board too. And so the lines that someone's going to take is very different, almost like snowboarding, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Except with much, much more consequence.
Yeah. So we keep kind of skirting around the consequences of, you know, not surfing one of these to completion. Tell us a little bit about that. Do we have a video? Do we have a Wipeout video?
Before we get there, though, I want to hit just training. You know, you talked a little bit about everything coming together between nature, between man, between the planning, between the crew, and maybe 5 years just to kind of get in the shape and get the experience. What goes into training for surfing in general, but particularly, what do you know about these guys' training?
Yeah, so just like most disciplines, whether that's snowboarding or mountain biking, whatever, you get a huge diversity of people who come into this. You can have your 17-year-old who's just jacked up on Mountain Dew and ready to get after anything he thinks he can take on the world, and he just loves the environment and doesn't actually have to train that much compared to maybe just having surfed most of his life and doing some long distance swimming, maybe some breath work training, some free diving. And then you might have one of these guys who's, you know, in his 30s or 40s, like Nick Lamb right here, you know, who treats his health and his athleticism no different than an Olympian or a professional martial arts athlete would, you know, counting down every aspect of his life and looking at every aspect of where his fitness could be increased to quite literally get to a level of superhuman-like capacity.
Fitness, diet, sleep, mental
mindfulness,
game. But tell me, is there anything unique about training? You said breath work, so we're going to go there, but are there other things that are unique about training for surfing?
Yeah, so I think John Florence said it best, which was that the best way to train for surfing is just to surf, you know. Just get out in the water and get your comfort increased. When I started trying to get into more deep, heavy water, one of my mentors and friends from the Central Coast, his name's Marco, he's known for diving for jade off the coast of Big Sur. So he will go hike 40 minutes down some sheer cliff with all of his diving gear, go down 40 feet, pick up boulders of jade, carry them up to the surface, swim them to shore, carry it back up the mountain. And he's the type of guy who's going to go surf the reefs and waves in my hometown that I'm like, wow, I want to be like that, you know.
Is he getting money for that jade?
A little bit, yeah. So that's his like primary thing is photography and jade. He's a pretty cool guy.
Wow.
Marco Mazza, highly recommend checking his stuff out. But yeah, so his thing was, he's like, dude, if you want to feel comfortable in that environment enough to push yourself, take yourself out to Big Sur and do some diving, you know. Get out there where the water's cold, it's dark brown, you can't see your hands underwater.
Wow.
and put yourself in some difficult environments. Practice your diving, your breath holding, your swimming, and being calm somewhere where you have no reason to be calm, you know? And then once you've transcended into that space, then you can kind of get more into the fine tuning, because you'll have guys who are like, yeah, I'm junior Olympian. I'm really good at swimming. I've surfed like a 3-foot wave before. I should be able to do something like this. And you quickly find that the calm in the environment is one of the most critical aspects. You know, you asked about training for it. It's a balance of all of it. You know, you look at, like, I don't even know where to go. You just, it's definitely tying experience with the actual training, the fitness, breath holding work we talked about, open ocean swimming, the actual sport. Diving is a big one. Free diving is huge.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Kai, and he's not only strictly into surfing now, right? Like, I think he's crossed over into a bunch of different sports outside of the water too, you know, that probably entail a lot of that similar mindset that would be required.
Yeah, downwind foiling.
Yeah.
That's gotten really popular.
This is Kai. So what he said when asked, you know, about training, a lot of the things you mentioned, and then he said just paddleboarding. You know, he said that's one of the hardest things. Do you do that? Do you know anything about it?
Was his comment specifically towards like
training?
So there's a couple different kinds of, when people say paddleboarding, there's like stand-up paddleboarding, like when you think of people on lakes on vacation doing paddleboard, or they'll even do it in the surf. There's downwind, which is like what he's doing with this foil, basically just literally carrying yourself along the ripples of swell lines across open ocean. And then there's prone paddleboarding, which is like, if you haven't seen it, it's usually a carbon fiber, some kind of foam-based watercraft that looks like one of those competitive canoes or kayaks, and you lay on it on your belly prone and just paddle and paddle. There's a movie like a decade ago called Chasing Mavericks, and it was about Jay Moriarty, who tragically died in a free diving accident on the Maldives, but young guy who went out and conquered Mavs, conquered his own fear and ambition. But one of the things that he would do to train, for example, was going out and prone paddleboarding. And in the film, it shows them like the goal that his mentor sets for him is like paddling from Santa Cruz to Monterey across that bay, right?
Wow.
So when these guys talk about training, it's because that's the exact position you're going to be in when you're doing the sport. You're going to be compressed down on your chest, head up, paddling, breathing as hard as you can to get the force you need to exert yourself.
Hard to do that in any other setting.
But you would think about their training would be focused on the moment that is the most dangerous potentially, right? Which is like where you're balancing down the face of a big wave, and that would entail, I don't know, balancing, mindset, breathing calm during that time. But it's not necessarily that. It's the paddling and all these other aspects of it.
And just like everything else, if you learn the components that all come together in that big moment, like the comfort in the storm that you talked about, finding the ability to be comfortable despite a very frightening experience or uncomfortable experience, that alone seems to be a building block to being able to perform in these, you know, freakish waves. But at the end of the day, you can't train on those waves because they don't come that often, right? You've got to be trained by the time the swell hits.
Yeah, and I mean, what's one of those things, unlike other sports, like for example, you know, we briefly talked about ice skating earlier, or for something like road cycling, that environment is always going to be there, and it's not going to be changing much. And if you were to stop your sport right there in the middle of it, and any of those things like tennis, nothing as bad is going to happen to you, right? You put down your racket, keep playing, everything's fine. Golf, same deal. But surfing, you are training not necessarily just to catch the wave, but you're training to survive the wave. You're just training to survive the condition and come home. Because you take any average person, drop them off in the waves that we were just showing, you're going to die in a matter of 20 seconds.
Yes.
Because you're going to panic and you're going to let out all your air and you will die.
So you're given a good pitch for big wave surfing being the most dangerous sport in the entire world. Do you think it is?
I definitely think it's up there. I definitely think it's up there. The risk is incredible. However, there's other crazy things that people do out there too. Like I forget what it's called. Like what's the squirrel suit thing people do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wingsuit. Base
Yeah.
jumping.
Yeah, that's pretty gnarly.
That's pretty gnarly.
Free soloing, like free soloing El Cap, for example.
Yeah,
that's pretty gnarly.
That's pretty gnarly.
But
But on the spectrum, I wonder.
on the
spectrum of like no danger, moderate danger, and extremely dangerous.
it's about almost as high as you can go. Yeah, I don't know.
What do you think? Do you think this sport is?
No question. Extreme sports, which this is one,
Right.
are extreme.
Extremely dangerous.
But I think thinking about the anatomy of a surfer and everything you just talked about with training, preparing for the moment, all the work that goes into it, the mindset, the connection with nature, all these things are major components of brain health. And so I was making the argument earlier that the surfer in general, not only the big wave surfer, but the surfer in general, contends with a number of elements in their training and preparation and in the joy of the sport that I think are epitomize what it means to be brain healthy. And so, just looking over there on your left, that's the Lancet Commission statement from 2024 about all the risk factors for dementia and stroke that could potentially be modifiable to prevent upwards of 45% of all dementia and stroke. And so if you think about a surfer, and what they put in, it's strength training. And so that's preventing things like fractures and, at older ages, obviously, major orthopedic injuries. They put in things like cardiorespiratory conditioning, breath control, that obviously builds onto the cardiometabolic risk factor list, preventing a lot of things like blood pressure problems and cholesterol problems, diabetes, and all that. And then there's also a social aspect to the culture of the sport, right? There's friends, there's a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and a dependence there on other people. And the other thing I think that doesn't really get captured in this chart over here is sense of meaning, sense of purpose, connection to nature.
Sure.
These things are known to be protective against all-cause mortality and to promote longevity, to promote health span. Just being in nature alone, doing the same amount of walking in nature versus the same amount on a treadmill inside is completely different for the system, and studies have shown that. And so it has many of the elements that I think are needed for brain health, all packed into one sport. And so I find that pretty interesting, pretty compelling pitch for water sports in general, but surfing.
Listen, I surf. I think I 100% agree. I think surfing.
Do you surf?
I do surf occasionally.
All right.
But I think as a hobby, it's an amazing hobby for all the reasons that you gave. But how does it stack up with other sports that don't involve exposing yourself to potentially brain trauma? Let me just say I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't necessarily agree with this stance. But how do you think it stacks up? You say, we look at this chart, the traumatic brain injury, 3%, right? 3% potentially modifiable risk factor for developing dementia. So then you substitute in something like tennis, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got a professional surfer up there. Of course, he's going to have an amazing looking body. He's going to look great. Put up a professional tennis player like Djokovic or Nadal, for example. He's going to have probably similar build, maybe a little bit more muscular than that. Regardless, he's not exposing himself to traumatic brain injury, but he's also not exposing himself to a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, being out in nature.
I like a couple of the other ones that.
So just give me a second. And when you look at this in terms of, how does it stack up as it being a potentially modifiable sort of risk factor?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's not a dedicated percentage given in this chart here to your left to being out in nature and whatnot.
Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't included in this chart, but
right.
that's kind of my point, is that there are so many different factors here that can play into brain health that we barely ever talk about. Some that, is become popularized recently are cold exposure, breath work, breath control, things like a sense of meaning, sense of purpose in life, a connection to something bigger than oneself, the ability to regulate emotion. That alone, is a key indicator and kind of the building block of resilience. And then this other thing that I thought perhaps surfing has, maybe more extreme sports have than the run-of-the-mill, tennis match or something, is the hormetic stressor. And so that's that controllable stressor, the stressor that the system has the capacity to overcome, but is certainly uncomfortable. For example, getting in cold water. These guys are doing it every day of their lives, or every day that they're out there, more so than almost any other person on earth, right? And it's just built into the sport itself. They have no choice but to get into that water. And so there's that. There's all the training. I mean, who paddles or uses their body that hard just for 5 seconds of performance, right? All of the work just to get in position to actually perform is incredible. And so all of those little stressors that are overcomable, the fear of, sitting at the crest and starting to descend, is overcomable to these athletes. Obviously, in the more extreme scenarios, the risk may outweigh the benefit, but overcoming over and over again throughout a lifetime as an athlete in this particular context, I feel like this sport is built of hormetic stressors, these overcomable stressors that themselves build resilience.
Yeah, I think, there can be a case made for some other sports that don't necessarily involve surfing being able to give you that.
Yeah,
maybe not,
for sure.
maybe not from like a fear perspective, right? But certainly, doing the work, pushing past exhaustion to be able to, succeed, whether that's immediately, like you see in surfing, versus down the road, where putting in the work every single day gets you to win that tournament in tennis, for example, gets you to win that game in any other sport.
People may argue this, but I mean, yoga, the actual meaning is comfort in discomfort. I know many surfers probably practice, but it could sound like a soft sport when we're talking about something like, or soft practice when we're talking about something like big wave surfing, but every moment of yoga is in some way is breathing through discomfort.
I mean, guys like Jerry Lopez, they preach the yoga that they do almost as much, if not more, to a critical aspect of their surfing. Them on land being able to have their heart, mind, soul all aligned and in the right place transforms their experience in the water. I do want to go back though. You said you surf, and he's like, no, I don't know if you do. If you're out in the water and you're having a good time, whether you have a board, no board, fins, no fins, funny nose, not funny nose on the board, whatever you're riding, and you're just getting out of the water, you're surfing and having
He's
a good
definitely
time.
got a funny nose. So.
Yeah, I definitely have.
I didn't mean that nose, but
let me just
fun thing though is important.
Let me just say,
It's super
every
critical.
time that I surf and I'm done surfing, I'm like, I need to do this more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I mean, and so on this thing here, one of the things that didn't get tapped on, and we talked about body shape and size, is ketosis. These guys are surfers in general. We tend to get out there and stay out there as long as we can. Unless we have to go in for work or family obligations, we'll stay out until the sun goes down, right? So then you're looking at sometimes anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. You're baking in the sun, just nonstop.
So the body is transitioning from using glucose as the primary resource as using
right.
ketones or fat.
Yeah, and I think there's something to say there, because we talk about the ideal athlete, right? And your athleticism being in alignment with your actual mental cognitive capacity, and therefore your brain health per se. And someone might look at an average surfer and be like, oh, they're super lanky, they're not going to win a fight against anyone. That's not athleticism. And it's clearly this is athleticism. Maybe this is actually what humans are supposed to be closer to. Maybe we're not supposed to be carrying 40 pounds more of muscle than our body wants to, right? So there's a lot to talk about there.
Let's hit ketones real quick, and then there's one more thing I want to touch on is body intelligence. But ketones, I don't know if you know, in the community, are people starting to catch on, because it's a hot topic in the health influencer community, that the ketogenic diet and or exogenous ketone supplementation through supplements is a performance enhancer. But are they using?
I think culturally it's what you see people doing, rather than maybe that. I don't think that development has hit and been like, oh, we're doing this and it's scientifically backed. I think it was culturally, ancestrally shared with people. It's like, hey, if you eat these foods that tend to be cheaper, if you're snacking down a bunch of nuts, you're eating some coconut flesh, whatever it is, things that are high in natural fats that are good for you, that's going to actually help you last longer in your surf session. You're chowing down some dates rather than, okay, let me power a Snickers bar real quick and I'm going to go surf for 4 hours. That's not going to cut it. You'll spike and crash, you know, and those things in the long run actually end up being better for you anyways.
That's pretty interesting.
You know?
The body intelligence bit, you know, I was thinking about and listening to a lot of surfers and big wave surfers in particular talk about their mental game and their approach to the wave, their approach to the sport. And it sounds like on and off in and outside the ocean, they're listening to their body. You know, it's not universal. Not everyone's doing it. Some people are objectively not doing it, you know, and are falling prey to things like drug abuse and things we talked about earlier. But on the whole, it seemed like there was a deeper intelligence and respect for the body. Because between the body, the board, and the water, I mean, that's really all there is. There's not a bat, there's not cleats, there's not all this other stuff to grapple with in order to play the sport. You know, some type of racket. It's the body, it's the board, and it's you battling the fears and kind of meeting the challenge. What do you think about body intelligence?
Well, I think the respect and appreciation, I think reverence actually is a better word, of our body as a vessel in surfing it's put forward much more than I think in other sports. In other sports, you'll see people much more quickly jump to performance enhancing substances, where in surfing, people want to do what they're doing for their entire life. They're not trying to win the next competition, and that's all they care about. They want to do this till the day they die. One of my greatest mentors, he's literally 76. He's a religious scholar who's born and raised in West LA, actually. He was part of the old school hippie scene. He lives off of like nuts and dates only kind of diet guy. But he went and surfed the North Shore with me on like an 8-foot day on one of those reefs. And I saw him take a wave on the head and he paddled right back out. And because he built himself for longevity. But I think what's important though about that concept of our body as a vessel, right? To take us from one place to another is core to the surf culture. You know, the experience of surfing, we talk about other sports in comparison, but with surfing, you are subjecting yourself to an incredible astronomic phenomenon, right? You have the heat of the sun heating up the surface of the ocean bodies of the Pacific Ocean, causing current changes in wind, temperature gradients that pushes waves thousands of miles across the ocean sea, producing massive waves that are capable of massive amounts of energy and unleashing it for a split second in a miraculous way, in a beautiful way, a geometric way on a segment of coastline. And for a split second, you get to become a part of that. Like, I don't know what better example of harmony into a greater being, greater knowledge, greater essence is than that, you know? And I think that's why people keep going back and forth. Again, it's not that they're there to conquer the waves. They're there to actually submit to what made the waves. I think it transcends all of that.
Yeah, you mentioned something really interesting, which was the longevity piece. And I think it probably speaks to your argument in terms of the brain health piece, right? That surfing might impart. But do you see a lot of like 70-something-year-old guys out there still doing the thing? Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, no, it's especially if you look like up in Hawaii, for example. I'm blanking on his name and I'm embarrassed that I am, but like Mason Ho is this famous surfer up on the North Shore, and his father like is out there ripping same triple overhead pipe, you know, and it's incredible. So that Jerry Lopez, like I said earlier, another name for someone who has been surfing his entire life and continues to surf exceptionally well. We're not talking about like, oh, he goes and surfs 2-foot waves on his longboard because he's all old and crashing. No, he's pushing it on heavy reef passes. Like, it's nobody's business.
Do big wave surfers retire?
Some of them do. A lot of them, I think, when they do, it's usually kind of like in a big ball of fire, or something happens and their family asks them to stop, or they got so injured that they're like,
it's too dangerous.
It's too dangerous. I can't keep doing this. But even amongst those guys that I've talked to, they're like, I miss it. Like, I want to be back there.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Seems like an obsession.
Not a lot of sports, not a lot of athletes in specific sports end up in retirement, secondary to injury. It's usually secondary to performance, especially with some of the football guys. That's probably one of the few sports where, you know, injury is really primarily your way to retire, your reason for retiring.
Yeah, and I mean, people are grading it down, but like Sean Dollar up in NorCal, he's got a documentary coming out soon that he's been working on with Albie Layer and Kai Lenny. But in his story, he got a pretty severe brain injury and fractured his cervical spine surfing big waves.
Wow.
And one of the things that's kept him from going back is a promise he made to his son and his wife. You know, like these aspects of what you want to do, what calls to your heart and speaks to you to put yourself in these crazy environments that are dangerous to you. Sometimes we put those aside for family, for career, for whatever, you know?
Yeah. You know, it was interesting in potentially another extreme sport, F1, Formula One racing.
Sure, yeah.
There's this moment, I forget the driver's names. I'm not well versed in F1, but I came across this moment that there was a guy in second place, and on the last lap, he passes the guy in first place. And the guy in first place could have cut him off, but it might have resulted in a crash. And because he didn't cut him off, the guy in second place ended up getting across the finish line first. And then they interviewed the guy that made the pass and asked him, he was a young guy, no kids, no family. And they asked him, it was like, how did you know that he wasn't going to cut you off and result in a big crash? And he said, he's got kids and he has a family. So I knew he wasn't going to do that.
Wow.
And it speaks a lot to the mindset of like, you know, a young boy hungry to win, right?
Yeah.
Versus someone else that might have a family. And maybe that wasn't the reason that he didn't cut him off. Who knows, right? But it's really interesting to think about the influences of our family and the reshuffling of our priority lists when it comes to an extreme sport like this.
Yeah, no, there's a humility that comes with like the maturation process.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, like a lot of these guys, they started when they were young guns, like Aloe that was in that first clip, Colin Dwyer up in NorCal, also one of those early Mavs guys, started when they were teens, like I think like 14, 15, 16, 17. Like they were out there doing this crazy stuff. And you watch their surfing style, it changes with each like following generation, each following decade. You know, they get more conservative, but they're still getting amazing waves, and it's part because their knowledge is now also maturing too, and their ability to read a spot and be like, I've been here for a while, I know the ropes, and so they're much more selective. And so I think there's the intelligence that comes with age. It's clearly shown.
Yeah.
There's this literature about why people choose the path or kind of occupation that they do, and there's jobs, careers, and callings.
Yeah.
And people who succeed the most, obviously, are those that have found their calling, you know, and that's their day in life. And so it seems to me that this sport and lots of extreme sports, and if anybody gets to a high level of a sport, it feels more like a calling, at least for what you had described and what I've seen others describe is it's just fun. It's the maximum amount of fun that one could have. It's a playground. And so, you know, just imagine that we try to recreate that in our day in life, in our job. I mean, if it's not in our occupation, can it be in another pocket of our lives? Because if we don't have that without fun, you know, I think that's another longevity piece. It's another thing that we could build up and expand on as a human race right now, especially with how much time we spend on just trying to survive, just trying to get our kids, you know, paid for, just trying to get all the different things to come together to meet ends, to make ends meet, but instead actually have fun.
Yeah. No, I think play is. I have no idea about any data behind this or anything, but it's anecdotally, it's super evident that the people who are having fun throughout their lives, when you look at them and they're in their 80s and their 90s, there's youth on their face, even though their face is aged, you know, and that goes into life quality. You know, we talk about brain health, like that transcends all of that. And so I think play goes into that. If you're not having fun, some people playing looks like this, other people it might look like surfing a 1 foot wave on a soft top, whatever. If you're not getting out there playing, I don't think your quality of life is going to be met.
Yeah, there's something like you mentioned, the dynamic and the dynamic nature of being out there on the water and surfing and all of that. It's just, there's something that I think I can certainly find a lot of fun I don't know, playing video games, scrolling social media for the foreseeable future, you know, but that's completely different than what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It involves something completely different.
I feel that way when I'm skiing trees. That's my favorite side of the mountain is a trail that goes through the trees. One, you get the canopy. Two, if it's snowing, forget about it. The beauty is just nuts. And then three, the variability, the amount of attention I have to have in the trees is maxed out. And so I'm in the moment only. Everything else, and the silence you get from that environment is like nothing else that I've ever experienced. So searching for that fun through nature, I think is something we're hitting on.
But that moment too that you're describing, whether it's skiing or surfing, you zone in, you're locked in, you get your tunnel vision, you're in harmony. But then you run out of breath for a second and you pause and then you just look at where you are, right? Whether it's skiing and you're watching the snow fall around you in this beautiful evergreen, or if you're surfing and you're looking at just this amazing creation around you, you're seeing the birds, the pelicans flying by, the sun setting on the water, how the sea foam changes color in the different kelp beds around you. Like, you get to bear witness to just nature in its most raw, untethered way. And I think that's a key part of it too.
It's what people in psychology would call grounding. The tactic of actually witnessing, recognizing, appreciating, having gratitude for the elements around you, for the movement of nature and your surroundings. That capacity in and of itself is an emotion regulation, kind of mental health booster.
Submitting versus conquering, I thought, was a really interesting point that you made, though. Get into that a little bit. Like, is that universal? It just seems like, is it, again, specific to surfing? Because you hear it all the time. Sure. Is that, have you found that in skiing, for example, or snowboarding? I hear like conquering the mountain, right? This is something that's very frequently.
Yeah, I'm probably not at a level where I've come up against anything so extreme that I felt I needed to submit to the will of this natural thing. But I've heard Kai talk about submitting his body, in a fall, in fact, to the wave, to the nature. Otherwise, if fighting it, and even underneath the water, trying to hold your breath and all that, if you fight it, it actually becomes worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first point to know is that not everyone does subscribe by that concept of I'm submitting to it. And when they do fight, though, that's the baseline thing, especially in any kind of surf wipeout, is to try and retain calm. There's a lot of crossover between the communities who practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and surfing. Part of it is because you need to access a technical flow state while you're battling something that may be substantially stronger than you, something that might quite literally asphyxiate you and choke you out, right?
I feel like we need a good Point Break trailer right here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the submission part comes in because in surfing, when you're underwater, if you are straining yourself, it's a turbulent mess.
Yeah.
It's pure white water and energy in every direction, sucking you up, pushing you down, and tearing you apart while simultaneously compacting you in, right? And if you try and do anything in that moment, aside from just completely relax every part of your body, you're going to burn through all your oxygen and you're going to start to panic. You're going to feel the acid build up in your blood and you're going to be screaming for air.
Yeah.
And so that's where the yoga comes in. Guys like Jerry Lopez, like we were talking about, what you do on land matters sometimes just as much as what you train for in the water, right? Because if you can't, for example, sit, I was listening to this talk recently. It had nothing to do with surfing, but it was a challenge. It was like an all men's group, and they were talking about how we want to start this session out by having you sit in a room with your phone and put on a 5-minute timer and sit still with your eyes closed. Don't move, don't touch anything, just sit and breathe. And see how hard it is. You start to feel your ear itch. You start to feel your arm shake. You start to realize you chose a kind of uncomfortable position, but you can't move. And see how hard we've made it become for ourselves just to be ourselves. And so if you can't sit with yourself for 30 seconds without checking your phone, without doing something, you're not going to be able to sit for 30 seconds underwater while you have an entire weight of the sea on top of you, right?
That's a good point. Yeah. What's the longest you've been held down? What did it feel like? Because I was given I think it was a 7-second rule. It's just like when you're down there, just start counting. Yeah. Count to 7. By the time you reach 7, you should be back to the surface again with the waves that I was surfing, right? Nothing probably like what you've surfed.
So it's interesting because like the experience underwater, like you said, the counting rule changes the game for Bill, because they're like, I was underwater for 40 seconds, and then the person who was in the lineup was like, dude, it was literally 6 seconds. I counted. Most waves aren't going to hold you down for longer than like 13 seconds. You know, when I'm talking about waves the size of like up to like 12 foot even, they're not going to hold you down for that long. But the thing is, imagine you're in a full out race sprint, sprinting across like a track, and then all of a sudden someone just puts their hand over your mouth and nose, and you have to keep sprinting. That's the feeling that we're talking about. And so the seconds suddenly feel incredibly long.
Perfect.
My longest hold down was a 2-wave hold down on the Central Coast. And that was like, honestly, it was probably only like 20 seconds or something. But I felt like I was there for 6 minutes.
That's still terrifying.
It's
20
so scary.
seconds. It'll be the longest 20 seconds of your life.
Yeah. And so that's why a lot of these guys will do breath training, where they'll translate, you know, empirically, like if I can hold my breath for 1 minute, that equates to 10 seconds underwater. So now I'm training to hold my breath for 6 seconds, or sorry, 6 minutes, to translate into like 1 minute worth of hold down, you know, and these guys will do that.
Yeah. Why don't we watch some wipeouts?
Let's do it.
Well, so we could click on the video, but just to show you 3 shots here, we've got, this is Mackay McNamara in February this year, where he had this massive wipeout, and then he had to be saved and resuscitated on the way by his buddy to the shore. And he was apparently in an induced coma for 72 hours. He came out feeling and looking great.
Wow.
So one of the many risks of the sport. Some other obvious risks are this head first off of what, a 30, 40-foot wave or something like that. Into the water.
And again, like we talked about, at these speeds, that water is not the friendly push around.
I've heard people say, like including yourself, like concrete.
Just like concrete.
So what's going to happen to this dude? So he's going to go face first into the water, and then what's going to happen to him? So
probably what you're going to see happen, because it's amazing. You see something of this size, it doesn't feel like it's happening that quick. But this wave is going to go from that to throwing itself entirely over, detonating, and becoming a wall of just tumbling white water within probably the next half second. And all the while, this guy is, I'm pretty sure that's Grant Twiggy Baker, but I'm not sure. I think by the board. But this guy's going to basically, as this wave is pulling him up, he's going to skip and cartwheel probably down this face as it's pulling that entire ocean in front of that wave. And then he's just going to become a part of that water and just get sent to the depths.
So
probably.
Here it pulls him up to that height, presumably. Right. And then just slams him down. So
at this point, when, like we were talking earlier in this session about wave dynamics, fluid dynamics, this wave is coming at 40 miles per hour, whatever. And then it hits this segment of reef and it slows down immensely. And that causes it to stand up and throw. And so now it's sucking water and it's going to pull the water up and dump it back down. And so he's going to be getting sucked up and drop back down for sure.
Back down.
Yeah, this is crazy. Also, shout out to Audrey Lambadikis. She's one of the local photographers up in Mavericks. She does a lot of fantastic stuff for the community up there. Yeah, another crazy shot. I mean, this person is free falling without coordination, like 25 feet at least, right? And so you look at people who do professional diving, for example, they're M to injuries too, right? It's not just water. It's water at speed. Yeah. Yeah, I was out on the boat this day. This was back in late December of this last year. And it's incredible how quickly these accidents happen, these wipeouts happen. Literally within a matter of milliseconds, he's going from knifing down the face of this wave to, like we said earlier, talking about catching like a little chop and getting, like a rodeo, getting bucked off of his board. And literally the progression of this one wave was that, the lip flies over and you can literally see him like in a washing machine, literally just tumbling, dumped over.
Wow.
It's just incredible speeds, like it seemed like for seconds, he didn't even break the surface because he was just getting literally spun on the surface of the water with that speed.
That's nuts. Should we watch the trailer?
Yeah, we got to watch this. This is incredible.
All right, so hold on.
Intro it.
Yeah, intro it.
Yeah, so this was from, I'm trying to remember, it's Facing Monsters. The surfer is Kirby Brown out of Australia. So he's a slab surfer. He's one of these guys like the people I talked about at the beginning who surf in silence. They're not getting a bunch of sponsors. They're not in competitions. They're not on any news source. And they're out there for the love of what they do. He was a slab surfer. So slabs are, like we were talking about earlier a little bit about different types of waves. Slabs are ones where there's such an incredible amount of power. It's usually going to actually almost throw further than it is tall. So you get these really thick, heavy, mean waves breaking on very shallow reef. Like we're talking 3 feet, 2 feet, even dry reef sometimes. He was doing a documentary about his surfing when actually partway through the documentary, he sustained a pretty serious head trauma, hitting the reef. And so all this is captured, and then he talks about his recovery story, the effects it had on his life, his family. I got to meet him when they presented this film. They were going on tour and they were in Santa Barbara. And this was actually one of my first interactions with, you know, the leaders, the elders, the OGs of big wave surfing. Who were openly talking about the pattern of head injury in the sport. This was one of my first points of contact, right? This is like early 2022. But I think, yeah, it's good to watch.
The ocean is where I go to find peace and a place where I belong. It's where I feel most alive. The thing
So this
that
is West
keeps
Australia
me
right now.
going is the thought of what is out there.
It's the holy grail for any surfer, the perfect wave. And one surfer, Kirby Brown, found his literally at the ends of the earth.
I've always had my own personal demons. When I don't have the ocean, I tend to turn to alcohol and drugs.
I could see it in his eyes. It was like a determination to self-destruct.
I feel like we're all just forced to be part of this machine. That's the monster I've been trying to get away from my whole life. I'm pushing myself as far as I can, but that comes at a heavy cost.
It's like getting me to come to their funeral.
So many of those waves is on a dry rock.
That's crazy.
Good chance you're not coming up.
You know, you could do everything right, and it doesn't matter in some of these waves.
Look at that reef right there, huh?
Why do we do this again?
Maybe I'm searching for something that's not even there.
It's a beautiful thing to see that connection he has with the ocean.
There's a huge fear in not coming home to my family and not being there for my kids.
Bye, sweetie.
I really don't want to have those thoughts going through my head while I'm trying to do what I do.
I don't think it will end until we can't do it anymore.
Goosebumps,
Dude,
right?
that reef is right there. That's not even 3 feet of water.
It's
it
like
seems
6
like.
inches maybe.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
absolutely.
That's insane. So
That's the reef right there.
Yeah.
is this the one where he had his head injury? This one, or was it somewhere?
So yeah, I guess spoiler alert. That one wasn't it. They
That
didn't actually
wasn't-
show the wave that he went down on that
Okay.
caused the head injury.
But you could certainly see how you could have a head
Oh
injury.
my God, yeah.
Wow.
You know, you could do everything right, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Look at that. This is a great shot, huh?
So cool.
Look at that reef right there. Huge wave, and on the other side, it really is like, look at the displacement of water that you see there.
Yeah.
Like on the right side, it's like Moses parting the Red Sea,
Uh-huh,
almost.
yep.
You know, like it almost seems like something divine. Like on this side, you know, this 10 feet of water, whatever. On the other side, it's, you know, whatever that is, 3 feet, maybe less. Yeah.
And what's really cool about these types of wave slabs too, or of any kind, is that you look at the height of the wave. Because from this angle we saw looking at him surfing the wave, right? The wave itself is like, you know, 6-7 feet tall. But then from the back of the wave, it's entirely flat.
Right.
And so what that points to is that you have the entire ocean behind it.
Yeah.
It's not just the waves like as it stands up.
Yeah,
It's
that's a great
all
shot.
of the ocean now going to surge across that reef
That's such a
and dump
beautiful
into it.
shot.
It's incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not awesome what happened to him, but it's
Yeah,
the appreciation for that is something else.
But it's one of those sports too where there's a certain humility and bravery that comes with talking about it. You know, surfing historically has been the sport for, you know, the hippies and the cowboys. Like, and the cowboys usually aren't going to say, yeah, I'm struggling, I'm starting to notice these behavior pattern changes, or I just don't feel well, and I think it's because of my surfing.
Yeah.
No one's going to say that, right?
Yeah.
Until now it's changing.
Yeah, and we kind of hit on this before, but like the culture of surfing, that's changed a little bit, where maybe it was that before, but now you see guys like Kai, guys like Nick that are like really, really into their performance.
Sure.
Right? That's been a really interesting shift in the culture of surfing.
So I wanted to get into your project a little bit.
Yeah,
I know it starts back when you were a little guy on the beach.
This kind of, I can't help but smile seeing this. So that on the left is me in early elementary school. That's my first shortboard. My dad got it for me. And so I guess my relationship with where I am now and surfing, it starts way back then. I started surfing when I was in early elementary school on the Central Coast. That's Pismo Beach there. And it transformed me, and I got to start traveling all around the world surfing. That's me in the Basque Country in northern Spain with a couple of buddies. It's really shaped and affected the way I see not just myself, but the world around me. And starting to see that there's this community of people that I've grown to love so much and, you know, seek so much inspiration and guidance from in all aspects of my life, to then see that there is a pattern amongst us that is destroying people's lives. I wanted to do something about it. And I saw it as low-lying fruit too. And it started with cultural change too. But yeah, so where I kind of started to go, went to college at UC Santa Barbara, and I got invited to join their collegiate surf team under the NSSA. That's me at Steamer Lane. Did not have very many good pictures from that time, but that's too bad. But during college, I also got a concussion that, you know, I don't even really like talking about or thinking about too much, aside from it took 3 years at least for me to get back to being like, wow, I feel normal again. For the first couple months afterwards, I couldn't speak properly. I couldn't form a proper sentence. I slept for the first month almost entirely of my quarter, somehow barely passed my classes. And no one around me knew what was going on. They didn't make the connection that this is sequelae of head trauma. And as I progressed through college, more and more of the guys that I surfed with, I started to notice that they had a habit of hitting their heads again, whether that was surfing or skating, snowboarding or boxing. I saw guys hitting their heads over and over again. They would be down for a week and have to get back into it. And unfortunately, with some of them, not all of them, but some of them, unfortunately, their lifestyle behaviors changed. I noticed certain risk-taking behaviors become more common. Their irritability, distractibility, all those things start to change too. And it was really heartbreaking, you know, to see someone you grew up around change, especially as I got older, to see that that was something that didn't have to happen. On the right, that's me just trying to follow in the footsteps of the people that inspired me. I got my first gun, that's what they're called, the big boards for bigger waves, a couple of years ago. And I've literally only gotten to use it like 3 times, but to me, it's just this symbol in my life of this dream and this inspiration that I follow from the people that have inspired me. And that's hence where this project comes from, is trying to take care of the people that inspired me. So now, you know, we're talking about where is the acknowledgement of this issue. Like I said, people usually didn't talk about this stuff until the leaders in the community did. And so you saw that originally with like Sean Dollar. You saw that with Kai Lenny coming out and talking about it. We talked about Kirby Brown putting out together this documentary. Keala Kennelly is just a badass surfer. All of those guys talking about their head injuries and how it changed them and the breaks it took from their career and their lives and their families started to make other people evaluate it for themselves, to think, maybe I'm not as invincible as I thought. Maybe I've actually been suffering this. and I didn't know what it was. Guys like Griffin Colapinto, for example, you know, an Olympian now after the Paris Olympics, wearing a helmet in the lineup. Things that would have been taboo 3 years prior now are rapidly changing. I remember after my concussion, I started wearing a helmet in the lineup, and people were like, what is on your head, man? Like, what is that? Like, what are you doing? What are you going to get hit by? The water is going to hurt you? And when I said, oh, I got a concussion, I want to be more careful. I'm in med school now, and I'm taking on loans to do the stuff. I don't want to hurt my head anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. But I started like only wearing it after that because it got to me. I was like, I feel like ostracized. I feel now like, am I questioning my own capacity in this environment? I have to wear this helmet that makes me feel congested and disoriented. But thankfully now new companies are putting out great models. Like Oakley has a helmet. That's Griffin's brand that he represents too.
That's interesting. The questioning your capacity and like also putting that on display. Yeah. You know, when you're surfing, you think that's a big hold up with a lot of guys and gals?
Definitely. I think it's changing rapidly though. Like it used to be, yeah, if you wore a helmet, like, what are you, soft? Like, what are you, scared? Like, you're not going to get hurt. And if you are, it's your fault probably. Yeah. But it's changed because now, for example, Pipeline on North Shore of Oahu, you look at them on any given winter swell and it's going to look like a lineup full of Tic Tacs, just a bunch of fluorescent heads popping up because they're all wearing helmets now. Because so many of the guys that charge those spots that have a name and a home there have hurt themselves in that lineup. People have respected it and they follow the change that the example has been set.
I do wonder, you know, you talked about submission to the wave, right? If you're going to be submitting yourself to something so powerful and you're appreciative of that power, then certainly you understand, you know, the ramifications that it might have on you. Yeah. And wearing a helmet, you know.
So I think some people do and some people don't, but part of it's because we don't understand entirely what we are subjecting ourselves to. It's a really easy equation to be like, okay, yeah, if I hit my head on the reef and I split my head open, trauma, that makes sense. I get hit by a board or a fin straight to the forehead, trauma, that makes sense. But now what about percussive injury? I think most surfers have experienced a time when they had a wipeout where they felt like they just got clocked in the head and they come up and their ears are ringing and they're disoriented trying to figure out where they are. And it takes a little bit for it to wean off. And they're like, but that's normal.
So, but just part of the sport, just
part of the sport,
right? But that is without having hit your head necessarily on a fin or a reef. You just go into the water.
And that's exactly right.
Get spun around, and then now you're having these weird symptoms that you would only have had you hit your head, really.
That's what we would think, right? You would think that if you jumped into a pool, for example, and you sat down there, that you're not going to shouldn't come under the surface now with your ears ringing, feeling disoriented and shaking. But the fact of the matter is there was an impact, right? You fell with all that weight of water changing around. And then now you were experienced through a rotational force that's pulling you and pushing you, compressing you in many directions. And sure, there might be an aspect that it's the compression on your eardrums causing some vestibular dysfunction, and that's why you feel off. But there's also an aspect of there is percussive trauma that we can accrue. We've seen that overseas with our vets who were exposed to IED blasts. And when we're talking about big wave surfing, something you could hear a mile off, we're talking about similar forces of energy here that people are succumbing to.
And you mentioned the rotational aspect. You know, rotational forces have actually been shown to lead to greater brain injury than maybe linear or horizontal forces. That's why getting punched by a hook, right, that creates that rotational energy to the brain, higher likelihood of getting knocked out by that kind of punch than, say, a jab, for example.
I remember when I was a kid, one of family friend of ours was Chuck Liddell, the Iceman, and I got to go watch one of his fights. I think it was in Georgia or something. And I remember that was the first time I ever got knocked out. Rashad Evans hooked him, caught him just perfectly on the chin. And it was amazing to see something that was displaced over about an inch of space could cause one of the strongest, toughest men I've ever known to drop in a second, right? And so I think there's something there. And then that is where this new study is coming together, this new project, this new search is to say, let's quantify an environment that is entirely unknown to anyone else right now. We have not put any empirical data or evidence onto that environment because it's dynamic, right? There's something like skateboarding, biking, motorcycles. We've developed helmets and we test them by dropping them in a linear fashion on the same spot with different amounts of force into it to say this is the quality of the helmet. something like this, where no two waves are the same, how are we going to quantify that, right? How are we going to figure out what is and what isn't safe?
Let's talk about the risk.
Yeah. So there's been a few studies that have come out looking at polling data and pulling data together on surfers and athletic injury patterns. And some of them will say different things, but one of the ones that we pulled up here was looking at the different traumas that we're seeing. And amongst those, we were seeing a huge prevalence. 37% of these participants were saying that they were getting, sorry, not 37% of the participants, 13 of this entire body of 35 participants. So it is, sorry, 37.1% of that population they were testing or getting data from had said they experienced some kind of mild traumatic brain injury. And then, you know, we're talking about something like 77, that's 7 out of 10 people at least, say they got hit in the head or in their face and had enough force to cause a laceration. I think the big issue here is that if they don't know what they're looking for in a concussion,
self-reported,
they don't know the signs and symptoms, they're not going to check the box that said that that happened.
Right.
And my suspicion is that this is substantially higher than anything that's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Loss of consciousnness is also a big deal in the water.
Yeah.
From speaking from a professional perspective, yeah, we saw that with was it McNamara?
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
That had to be put in a coma because I guess he lost consciousness as part of this wave.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I believe it's Greg Long also out at Cortez Bank, that wave out the seamount, 100 miles off the coast of San Diego. Also went unconscious underwater, to my knowledge, and it's like, we don't know what happened to them in that period, and all they have afterwards is their symptoms to express in their presentation for us to go off of. But the risk of it is you're going to drown if you don't have someone to rescue you.
And I think all sports are starting to ask this question, and it goes beyond the occupational hazard of contact combat sports to any occupation that involves some repetitive head impact. Could be repetitive blast from war. It could be repetitive kind of shockwave from breaching doors in war or as a police officer, or it could be jackhammering or fighter pilot with all of the reverberation in the plane, or with speedboat operators. Any occupation that involves repetitive head impacts, even if they're not concussive, and maybe particularly if they're not, could lead to a risk of chronic traumatic encephalopathy or some other conditions neuropathologically that they're putting on the table now to study. We don't know the trajectory of these things in life. There's lots we don't know, but we do know that there are occupational hazards to contact combat sports and other occupations that have repetitive head impact as part of it. And so one could ask, with all the reverberations that are going on, all of the hits against the surface of the wave, all the spin cycles that are going on in a given athlete lifetime for a surfer, is this also a risk for repetitive head impacts?
I absolutely think it's a factor. I think it'd be remiss to say that it wasn't. And I mean, at the end of the day, implication though is what will change with any finding. Let's say this has some pretty severe findings. It says, yeah, all these surfers who do any of this activity are at risk. Will that stop people from doing it? I don't think so. But what I think it will do is at least give people an opportunity to have awareness of what to look out for, so that they know when to go for help. What does help look like? Who can they go to? Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So they may not stop, but they could do it safer. Yeah. A lot of fighters right now, UFC, MMA, are training in a completely different manner.
Yeah.
No longer creating the harshest condition for the best look in training, against a concrete floor to be able to be tough as nails going into their actual fight, but they're training smarter. They're not training as hard against those the sparring sessions. They're not sparring as much.
Yeah, the sparring almost looks more like a play now rather than it is, I want to reenact what the fight
simulation
is going to be.
Yes.
I want to simulate that same stressor. Yeah. And they found that at least in my understanding, is that when you have less cortisol in that environment, your ability to retain the learning in the pre-stage, the play stage, the learning stage goes up substantially.
That's
really
right.
That's interesting. Yeah. What about, you mentioned the OGs? They're still surfing.
Yeah.
Have you gotten a sense as to, is there anecdotally dementia in this population? Are they suffering?
I was going to ask the same thing.
Are they suffering from something, that you might tie back to their experience or their career in surfing?
Definitely. So, I mean, a lot of these guys will very openly say, like, in that documentary that's going to come out with Sean and Albie and Kai, Pete Mel is interviewed in it, and he talks briefly about his experience and how the compounded effect of his experiences do prevail, and he does feel those changes. You know, when it comes out, we'll be able to talk more about it, but at the same time, it's just like that accrued trauma that you're experiencing and how it affects your mood, your irritability, your function, focus, sleep. All of these things come into play. You know,
That's really interesting.
So there's this safety summit that happens every year, and how does your project kind of fold into that? What do you think, before kind of getting into the project, what do you think the reception is for the idea of bringing more safety, more awareness to the sport?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. So the experience I've had since I've pitched this idea, since its genesis, has been overwhelmingly open arms from the community, and especially from their like, when I say leaders, the people who pioneered the sport, people who set an example that's followed, is that this is important. And we want, if there is a way to prevent long-term sequelae of this stuff, we want to see the change, because we don't want our kids who are now following in our footsteps to have to go down the same path if they're going to follow it in some way, shape, or form. So one of the connections that I've been very graciously invited to was through a community-run event that I talked about. Audrey Lambadai, because she's one of the photographers. She's someone who also experienced a pretty severe concussion, and because of it has taken on a role of community activism, increasing awareness about head injury, specifically for the Mavericks community, helping to connect them with resources, knowledge bases about what is what is a concussion, what is CTE, how can we prevent it, how can we recover, or at least seek to begin our recovery. And she is very close with the community up there, and through her and her connections and network, I was invited to join to give a talk at the next Maverick Safety Summit about head injury in surfing. And we're going to talk about signs and symptoms, and then we're going to hope to basically tie in this project that we're going to try and roll out in the next fall, which I can hold off on talking about, or I can
go for it.
And so basically what we're looking at is, unlike something that's been ever done before in this environment, first of all, is taking a batch of these big wave surfers, these professional athletes, and doing a pre and post circumstance cognitive assessment, SCAT-6, basically, which looks at their cognitive capacity, functions, to see if they have any deficits, but to establish a baseline. It's the same thing that most kids go through when they're in a high school or collegiate sport that is required when they start the sport through this.
The Lakers go through this. Some of the Chargers go through this. So, I mean, the SCAT-6 is the standardized concussion assessment tool, the sixth generation. And so the idea would be to not just get a cognitive battery on these folks, but balance, a neurological exam, and a well-rounded point of view of their neurological status.
Absolutely.
And then what? After a swell comes?
And so then we're going to be following hopefully about 30 different athletes across a season. So that's, anywhere from late October all the way through April, which is that swell window where you get these big Pacific Northwest swells that come down. And if at any point during that window they have a severe wipeout, they hit their head, they start to have any symptoms that we talked about, we will go and do a follow-up post-session, post-event, post-trauma evaluation. And then especially if there's any change or deficit since their baseline, we're going to follow up with intervals to see how that recovery pattern changes. Now, the thing that makes this study so exciting is now quantifying other aspects of physiology as well as environment. So the physiology, we're going to be following with Oura rings, ideally. And so basically that's going to be able to give us insight into things like body temperature, heart rate variability, sleep patterns, looking at REM versus light, deep sleep, all of which have known evidence to indicate changes of stressors that relate to brain injury. And so having that to quantify the long-term stress and recovery will be pretty incredible. And then lastly was to quantify the environment. Like we said, no one's ever quantified the forces that are being that these athletes are being subjected to in a number basis and an academic basis. And so there's a company out of the UK called HIT, which produces an accelerometer basically that registers linear as well as rotational forces. And we're going to basically custom create a wetsuit hood or a helmet to like stabilizer to put that device on some of these guys and have them go surf, so that we can get an idea of what is their brain being subjected to, what's their head and C-spine being subjected to in those environments. And so the hope is to get some data off of this that will give us information about what is happening to these surfers, rather than just basing it off of the sequelae, their symptoms 5 years, 10 years down the line. Let's see what's actually happening at that moment.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. You're going to get baseline physiologic metrics too from the Oura Ring before?
Yeah, so we'll basically load them with the Oura Rings. The hope is to start our recruitment this summer, and then early fall, well before the season starts, get them outfitted with all this stuff, do this baseline testing so that we can establish their baseline for both of those things, whether that's the cognitive functions, as well as their physiologic baselines.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And
pretty well received, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on top of it, there's going to be some pretty cool incentives that everyone I've proposed it to is pretty excited about. You know, there's the premise of potentially being able to keep the Oura Ring afterwards. There's financial incentives and awards and prizes for partaking in it.
Awesome.
There's a lot of exciting stuff going on.
That sounds great. There's a documentary, right? Did you mention it already? Do you want to go into it at all or no?
Oh, yeah.
I think
this is something you wanted to add to?
Yeah, I think the thought here is that this in some way represents some of the OGs coming to terms, as you said, with head injury as a major risk of the sport. And so tell us kind of the premise of this.
Yeah, so this is the brainchild of Sean Dollar, someone that I would say now is a friend. He's truly a remarkable person in the big wave surfing community. He's someone who set the tone from the beginning, continues to push the limits, and is just truly respected out in his community and the world, the surfing world, not just because of what he does, but how he does it. He's just a really kind, gracious person that really embraces everyone. And I've been lucky enough to get to know him and his projects. And so this is one of them, is Brainwaves, which is basically a documentary following his story, his recovery. But what's special on top of it and sets it aside is that he's following also simultaneously Albie Layer, another big wave surfer in Hawaii, and Kai Lenny, who a lot of us already have heard the name, and his brain injury, his recovery story. And following all three of them together, it's pretty remarkable. It's still in the works, but you can find their video, the sizzle.
So it follows, each of them had some sort of concussion as part of their big wave surfing, and it follows each of them.
Yep.
Cool.
See if I can play it right from here. Might have to link out.
Video is private.
Yeah, one of the really exciting things about it too is, like I said, like these guys set the tone for the entirety of surf culture as it progresses. And so to have them openly sharing their story, every little bit, having their families interviewed, their friends interviewed, talking about details that usually don't come to surface, I think it's going to open a conversation for many, many more people to recognize and come to terms with where they might be and the things they might be going through.
You know, even from an outside perspective, I'm not in the community, obviously, but I've kind of been seeing the rumblings of increased awareness of concussions and surfing. So, you know, it's interesting.
I was thinking that I was in deeper water, and I ended up diving headfirst into a rock. My neck just starts shredding, just, you know, like I can hear it buckling and popping and tearing.
The water compressed really quick, and it gave me a concussion, like a shockwave.
Albie Layer took one of the most massive waves directly on the head.
I couldn't see anything. It was like bright white, like everywhere. Something's definitely wrong here.
It looked like a straight building directly on his dome.
The last thing I remember is landing on my side on the water, just the water. Blacked out, and then I looked at my helmet and it was split in half. When I was in the ER, they said if I didn't have the helmet, I would have died.
A Wipeout sent big wave surfer Kai.
People don't think of surfing as a brain damaging sport.
Yeah.
And you fall on a big wave, it's so much different than falling at any other sport.
It's water, but from a 30-foot free fall, it's like hitting cement.
When Mavericks breaks, it shakes the Richter scale at Berkeley. Think about all that energy transferring through the human body.
You see someone get hit so hard and you talk to them and their pupils, one bigger than the other, and they're just like Muhammad Ali on this last leg, just all, hey.
It's a reckless life. There's going to be consequences at some point.
I mean, something would have to give. And it did.
2 years ago, setting a world record at Cortez Bank, feeling the highest of highs, being on top of the world.
Sean Dollar, who is now on the world's big wave stage.
To like literally have that all stripped away. I was getting depressed. I was mentally unstable. I'd lose my temper.
He would have fits of rage, and I didn't leave my kids around with him alone for a long time.
The irritation would turn to anger, and then like after that, I'd leave and I'd just get the weight of like depression and sadness.
I just went into this downward depressive spiral. I just couldn't imagine like going on.
He truly felt like the world was against him and that there was no way out.
I think before Sean, brain injuries and big wave surfing wasn't really taken seriously. When someone as badass as him talks, you listen.
Traumatic brain injury is the #1 cause of acquired death or disability in people under the age of 40. What happens in a traumatic brain injury is the membrane of the cells gets stretched. And when it stretches, it opens little holes. When those holes open, chaos happens.
My only contact sport is my head against the ocean. And it does definitely take effect, yeah.
I definitely think there is a stigma around brain injuries, especially in the water world. Nobody wants to admit that they're weak or there's something wrong with them.
The sponsorship obligations are really intense. I mean, I actually did have a sponsor who like sent me a message and was like, hey, look like your posts were down all of January and can't be having that. And I was like, do you guys realize I was like brain dead?
I'm an open book about traumatic brain injuries. I've turned the corner and come back. My life was a mess, and I would love to share. I would love to talk about it with you guys and offer any help or service I can.
Some level, I hate being known for like, oh, that's that brain injury guy. You know, the most important thing I've done in my surfing career is be open about that.
This is the helmet that saved my life out of pipe. Practice. It reminds me of the Latin word acheron. In order to get to heaven, you have to pass through hell. No one truly understands unless you've been through it.
You can heal your brain. You don't have to suffer, but you have to get up and you have to do something about it.
That's awesome. You know, one thing that it got me thinking is, you know, if these peak performance guys like Kai, like Sean, that you would relate to being super resilient dudes, you know, they're suffering concussions and they're suffering these symptoms that are persistent from them, like the depression. I think that can help a lot of other people that maybe aren't peak performers, that suffer concussions, that have similar symptoms, to not feel that, you know, they're uniquely vulnerable or something similar, you know. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's any chance we have to normalize the experience of brain injury, concussion, physical, mental illness. It takes the stigma out of it to some extent and allows somebody to focus on themselves and focus on recovering, get the help they need. So I'm glad that this is out there. I'll be looking forward to watching that film when it's finished.
Does it have a release date yet or no?
So they're in the editing phase right now.
Okay.
They were basically sourcing to get an editor and like sourcing funding for it. And so I think now they've finally found somebody, and can't imagine it's gonna be too much longer, but I'm super excited for when it comes out, and I think it's gonna shake things for a lot of people.
If someone wants to kind of get updates on when it's being released, is there anywhere that they can go?
I would highly recommend following Sean Dollar on Instagram. He has his own website as well. you know, following guys like Kai Lenny and Albie Layer. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's going on their projects and just hearing about them in the surf world.
Perfect. What about someone that wants to follow up your research, whatever it is that you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. And so for that, you know, I'm able to do this through the generosity and like mentorship of the Bickert Lab and as well as the Brain Sport program. And so keeping an eye on them and what they're posting, what programs are coming on. I really hope to be able to continue to update you guys about the program too. So just following through with the podcast and seeing what's the latest, I think will really be a great way to keep up.
Yeah, sounds great. I think this was a great introduction into this whole concussion and surfing world. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and talking about it. And hopefully we can follow through on some more of this information and get some other guys from the community to come on and hopefully kind of speak what their experience has been.
My hope is that we can join you on a boat at the Mavs.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen.
And film some of it and potentially help out in some way.
Yeah.
But the research is going to be a beast. And so I think we've really got to stay on top of getting the baselines done.
Definitely.
Being as data-driven as possible. I think, you know, adding the ring to the picture, the accelerometer to the picture, maybe a pupilometer will help us to really quantify. And I think it's beyond just if someone's traumatized. I think also trying to capture what happens even if you don't wipe out. What happens to the brain and body even if you don't wipe out. And so that would be a perfect group comparison. People who wipe out, people who don't, and maybe somebody who actually didn't surf that day, you know, somebody who had to sit it out. We're going to recognize different things.
Yeah. Sounds great. Thanks a lot, buddy. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you guys. Yeah, had a great time with you all.
Thank you for watching. And if in doubt, go catch a wave. And most importantly, be better. Cool.
Sweet.